Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. In this video, we are continuing our Python tutorial series for absolute beginners. And in this video today, we will understand how to use loops. So for example, we want to do something repeatedly a number of times. For example, let's say you want to print a certain text, let's say print hello for 10 times, right? So one way to do that would be just write print hello 10 times and then it will print hello 10 times, right? But a smarter way or more efficient way to do this would be to use a loop. So the way we can use the loop is either by using for loop or while loop. So in our today's video, we will understand how to use these for loops and while loops. And as we have been doing in our previous videos, that first we go through a number of examples and then I will give you some exercise problems you can practice on. We'll go through the solutions of those exercise problems. And in the end of the video, I'll also go through list comprehension, which is a more efficient way of writing these for loops. So as we do in our other videos as well, so let's go through the process. So I go to my Python tutorials folder and I open a terminal here. So I will first activate my conda environment. So first let me just see which conda environment we have been using. So I think we have been using tutorial 1. So I will activate that particular conda environment. So conda activate tutorial 1, right? And now I will just do code dot to start the Visual Studio Code. And now I have the Visual Studio Code set up here. So let me just close all of these things. And yeah, so for today, let's start with a new file, right? So I'll just click here, start with a new file. So let's say tutorial 3.ipynb. So normally whenever we try something, so first we are just doing it in a notebook, and then later when we have established code, then we put it in a .py file. So I'll also for now just make a .py file as well. So tutorial 3.py. So let me go back to our notebook and we will first start with understanding how to use while loops. Okay, so let's say we want to print numbers from 1 to 5. Okay, so how do we do this? Using while loop. So for while loop, the format that is follows is that we have while and then we have a condition that it is true or false. And if it's true, then it goes through the while loop, and until it is true, it keeps on repeating that loop. And whenever the condition is false, then it stops. So it's mostly understood. It's better understood by an example. So let's say we want to print a number from 1 to 5. So we start with, let's say num is equal to 1, and we want to print until this thing goes till 5, right? So while num is less than or equal to 5, then what we want to do is we want to print that particular number, right? And we keep on increasing the number by 1 every time it prints the number. So what this will do is that first it checks whether this number is less than or equal to 5 or not. So since 1 is less than or equal to 5, then so this is true. So while this is true, it goes inside, then you have this print this particular number. So it will print 1 for the first time, then it will increment. So num plus is equal to 1. So what this will do is that this is same as writing num is equal to num plus 1. So now num will take value 1 plus 1, that is 2. Then again it will check. So 2 is less than equal to 5. So it is again true. So it will print 2. Then it will again be 2 plus 1, 3. So 3 is less than 5. It's true. So it will again print 3. 3 plus 1, 4. Again true. Until 5 it will be true, and then in 6 it will finally be false. So it will stop going through it. So if we run this code, so first we have to choose an environment, so tutorial 1, and if we run this, then it will print 1 2 3 4 5, right? So I hope you get the logic. While a certain condition, so until this is true, it will keep going on through this particular loop, right? So let's say we wanted to print until 10. So while num is less than equal to 10, then it will keep on printing until that particular number, right? So another example, let's say we want to calculate the sum of numbers from 1 to some given number n using a while loop. Okay, so let me just write it here as a comment. So let's say another example that we want to calculate the sum of numbers from 1 to n using a while loop. So you can also pause the video and try to do it yourself. So it's quite simple. So let's say we have n is equal to 5 and sum is the variable where we want to store the sum. So we start with another variable. So let's say num is equal to 1. So while this num is less than or equal to n, right? So we'll start from 1 and then keep incrementing that particular number, right? So while num is less than or equal to n, then what we want to do is we take this sum and we add num to it, right? So this will be sum is equal to sum plus num. So sum starts with 0. So for the first time 1 is less than or equal to 5, so 0 plus 1, so sum will be 1. Next time what we want to do is we want to add 1 plus 2, 3, right? So what we want to do here is we want to increment num by 1, right? So what happens is that for the first time when it comes, so num is 1, 1 is less than 5, less than or equal to 5, so it's true, so it goes down. So sum is equal to sum plus num, so sum will be 0 plus 1, so sum will be 1. Then num is incremented to 2, so 2 is less than or equal to 5, it's true. So now sum had a value of 1, so it will be 1 plus 2, so sum will be 3. Then num will be so num we had 2, so it will increase by 1, so 2 plus 1 3, so 3 is less than 5. Then again it will be 3 plus 3 6 and so on. So when you are doing this for the first time, if it sounds confusing, then you can use a pen and a paper and write all of those values. Okay, so you start with sum, its initial value was 0, num initial value was 1, and for every iteration that we are going through this loop, how it is changing, right? So in the end what will happen is that, okay, let's just print. So we want to print, so the sum of numbers from 1 to this n, right? So from 1 to n is sum, right? So this is what we want to print. And when we do this, so 1 to 5, right? And this you can also check. So 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5, right? So this is 5, 9, 12, 14, 15. Okay, so we are doing the right thing. So I hope you get the logic what we are doing here. And as I said, if you still have confusion, just write down all of these values as we go through this loop. And if you do this with a pen and a paper, then it will be much clearer, right? So let's go through another example, which is guessing the secret number, right? So what we do is that, so let's say we have a secret number that we know, right? So secret number is equal to 5. Now what we want to do is that we want to ask the user to guess this particular number. So we will keep asking user until he guess this particular number, right? So until the number, whatever the user is guessing, until that is equal to 5, we will keep asking the user to keep guessing the number. So what we want to do is, so while this is true, right? So until the user guess the right number, we want to keep repeating this loop. So what we want to do is we want to ask the user to guess a particular number, right? So we ask from the user that to input a number, right? So let's say input, and then the text that will be displayed is guess the number, and we can say that number is an integer between, let's say, 0 to 15. Okay, so we want to make the game a bit easier for the user. So the user has to guess a number that is between 0 to 15. So this will run infinitely, right? So since true is always true, so what we want to do is if the number whatever the user has guessed, right? So if this guess is equal to the secret number, then we want to print congratulations, you have guessed the congratulations, right? You have guessed the right number, right? But if let's say, yeah, so when the user guess the right number, so we want to print this message, but we also want to break this particular loop, right? Otherwise it will keep on continuing because this true will always be true. And so if the user guesses it's right, then we want to just break the loop there, right? So you can use this break. And if the number that is guessed is not true, then what we can do is print sorry wrong guess, try it again, right? So sorry wrong guess and try it again. So in this what happens is that until the user guesses the correct number, it will keep on asking the user for the new number, right? So let me paste this in our tutorial.py so that we will run the .py file. Okay, so this we have it here, and let me open a terminal here inside this, and it's already activated in this environment, and we want to run this particular file, right? So Python tutorial3.py. okay, so it asks the user to guess a number. Number is an, okay, I had a spelling mistake here, so let me just correct it. Integer between 0 to 15, and number 0 to 15, and let me just give a space here, right? And yeah, so if I enter let's say 7, so since 7 was not equal to 5, so it printed here sorry wrong guess, try it again, and then it again gives me the same print here, right? So again guess the number. So if I write 9, it still doesn't go. So until you guess the right number, it will keep on asking you this, right? So if I guess 5, then it will say, okay, congratulations, you have guessed the right number, and then it breaks that while loop, and then we have, yeah, the program stops after that, right? So this is an example of while loop when you want to keep running a particular program or keep doing a particular thing until some condition is met, right? So if that condition is met, then we break that particular loop, otherwise it keeps on going, right? So these are examples of using while loop. So almost all of these things you can also do using for loop, right? So it depends then. So once you know both the for loops and while loops, so in some conditions it will be better to use for loops, whereas in some other condition it will be better to use while loops. So as you get more experience, then you will make that decision whether to use for loops or while loops. Okay, so what for loop does is that it iterates over a list, right, or a string or a particular range or a particular iterator that we give. So we will first start with just the simple syntax. So what we do is that, so let's say we want to print numbers, right? So from 0 to 9 or so on. So what we do is that for I in range 10, right? So this generates an iterator, and this goes through that iterator, right? So for I in range 10, and if I do print I, then what it will print it. So whenever we do range 10, so it starts from 0 and it goes one number less than this given number, right? So 0 until 9. So this whatever is entered here, so this is not included. So 0 until 9. So it will print from 0 to 9, right? So it's quite simple. And this range you can also have it not start, so by default it starts from 0, but we can also have it this way, that for I in range, let's say 2 to 8, right? So if I do print of I here, print I. Then what it does is that it will start from 2, then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then it will stop at 7, right? So just 1 before. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so this is how we use for loop, quite simple. So this is using range. We can also use a for loop on a list. Okay, so we will go most likely in some later videos over in more details about what is a list, what is a dictionary, and so on. But for example, right now, let's say we have a list of strings. So we have a fruits, and the way we write list is we just have these brackets and then we give all of these items. So apple, and then we have another item, let's say banana, and then we have another item, orange, right? So we have these fruits. So now what we can do is, let's say we want to print all of these fruits, right? So we can write a for loop. So for fruit in fruits, right? So what this will do is that it will iterate over all of these items. So fruit will first take apple, then it will take fruit will be banana, fruit will be orange, and so on. And then we just print fruit. Okay. And all of these things, please keep on doing simultaneously on your computer as well, so that you don't feel left out, right? So this is more like a practice thing that you keep on practicing, and then you'll get better at it. So for fruit and fruits, you print fruit, then you for the first time the fruit will have fruits, right? So fruit will be apple, so you print apple. Second time you have banana, so you have banana. Third time you have orange, then you print orange. Now one more thing which is very useful, which can be useful sometimes, is that let's say you also want to print the index and also these fruits. Okay, so you want to print like 0 apple, 1 banana, 2 orange. So what we can do is that we can write for I comma fruit in enumerate. Okay, so you'll see what this enumerate does. So when we write this enumerate fruits, what it returns is that it returns the value here, but also it returns the index. So it returns 0 and apple, right? So I will take 0 and this fruit will take apple for the first loop. For the second loop, then I becomes 1, then fruit becomes banana. And for the third loop, I becomes 2 and fruit becomes orange. So let's say we want to print both of these things. So let's say I print I, and then I also print fruit. Okay, so what it does is that for the first time is like I will be 0, fruit will be apple, so it prints 0 apple. I, in the second iteration, it will be 1, fruit will be banana, so 1 banana, and then 2 orange, right? So these are useful in many different situations. Now similarly, as we did for a list, right? So what we can do is also we can loop over a string, right? So the way it works is that, so let's say we have something, just a string message. So let's say it has hello world, right? And we have this, and what we want to do is we want to print its every single character in a single line, right? So let's say what we can do is we can just loop over this string. So for char in message, so for the first time this char will take this H, second time it will take E, then it takes L, then it takes L, then it takes O, then it takes space, then W, then O, R, and so on. So if I just do print char, then what I get is, yeah, first time it prints H, then it takes E, then L, then L, then O, and so on. So you can loop over a string as well. Okay, so let's just, we have already seen break. So whenever we are going through a loop, and we can break it at a particular, whenever we want to break it, right? Or if we want to skip something, then we can use something called as continue. So let's just go through one more example. So let's say we want to print from 1 to 5, right? So what we did earlier, so this can also be done using this way, that num is equal to 1, and while it is true, so we want to just keep continuing it. So while something is true, what we uh, want to do is we want to print the number and we increment it, right? So plus is equal to 1, right? So what this will do is that for the first time it will print 1, then it will increment 1, so 1 to 2, then it will print 2, then it will print 3, then it will print 4, then it will print 5, and so on. So it keeps on printing it, right? So while this is true, so true is always true, so it will keep on printing in an infinite loop, right? But we want to break it at some particular time. So what we can do is we can give a condition that if number is greater than 5, right? So if number becomes greater than 5, then we put a break, right? So what this will do is that when the number becomes 6, so 6 is greater than 5, then it will break this particular loop, right? So we will print it only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is how we break it. And also in you are using a loop, and let's say for if some condition is met, then you don't want to continue through the rest of that loop. You want to just skip that particular iteration, right? So let's say we want to print just the even numbers. So what we can do is, let's say for num in range 1 to 11, so what we can have is that, so we want to print these numbers, right? So if we just do this, then what happens is that it prints all of these numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But let's say we want to print just the even numbers. Then what we can do is that if number or we want to print just the odd numbers, let's say. So if number divided by 2 is equal to 0, so meaning that if it's an even number, then we just continue, right? So this will again just go through here, so it will not go through the rest of the loop. So you'll see what happens. So, or let me write this particular thing here so that we see the difference, and let me remove this thing from here, right? So what happened here is I print all the numbers from 1 to 10, but now I want to skip printing the even numbers. So if I do this, then what it does is that for the first time when it is 1, so 1 divided by 2 is not 0, so it goes here, so it prints the number. Second time when it gets 2, so 2 divided by 2 is 0, so it just continues. So by continue, what we mean is that it does not go through the rest of the whatever code is written in the loop. So it just goes back here and then it again starts through the loop, right? So when it is 3, then this condition is not met, so it prints it, whereas when it is 4, so continue, so it just goes back, right? So this can be useful in some situations. Now we can also use nested loops, so one loop inside other loop and so on. So whatever we are learning until now, so let's say we learned if else and so on. So if else you can combine with the loops, and also inside a particular loop you can have another loop. So let's say we want to print some particular pattern, and let's understand it through an example. So let's say size is equal to 5, and we have something as for I in range of size, right? So this I will go through 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 and so on. And then we have another loop inside this, so for j in range of size, so this will again go through 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 and so on. And then what we do is we print star, and the end character by default is always a new line, so it goes to a new line, but here we will give the end character as just a space. Okay, we'll see what happens with this. And after this for loop is completed, this j loop, so we will just print a blank, right? It goes to a new line. So if we run this, so what happens is that, so size is 5, right? So for I in range size, so I will be 0. So for the first iteration, I will be 0. Then we go into this. So for j in range of size, so j will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 and so on. So for the first time it will be 0. So it prints star and then it gives a space, right? When j is 0. Then again when j is 1, so it will again print star and it will give a space. Again, when j is 2, it will print star, then it will give a space. Again, when j is 3, it will print star, it will give a space. When j is 4, it will print a star and give a space, right? And after the end of this loop, then it finds this print, so it goes to a new line, right? And here again it starts, so I is 1, and then again it starts for j 0 1 2 3 and 4, right? So 0 1 2 3 and 4, and then it again goes to a new line, and then so on. So it prints all these things. So it's quite simple, and as you go through all of as you practice more and more, you'll get more familiar, and you'll feel a lot more at home when you want to use these for loops or while loops. So for now, what I would like you to do is try a few exercise problems. So let me just show it to you. So just a second. So you can pause this video, or you can also close this video, and you can just try to solve these 3 problems. So the first one is write a Python program to calculate the factorial of a given number using a while loop. So what do you mean by factorial of a given number? So let's say I want factorial of 5. Then it will be 5 multiplied by 4 multiplied by 3 multiplied by 2 multiplied by 1. So whatever number you start from, you keep on subtracting 1, and you keep on multiplying until you reach 1, right? So if you, let's say if the number is 10, then you go 10 multiplied by 9 multiplied by 8 multiplied by 7 and so on until 1, right? So that will be factorial of 10. So you want to write a program that does that. Okay. Second question is, given a list of numbers, use a for loop to find the sum of all even numbers in the list. So you have a list of numbers and you want to find the sum of all the even numbers in that particular list. That's the second question. The third question is, you want to print this particular pattern. Okay. So these 3 you can take it as an exercise, pause the video, do it on your own, and you can come back and then see the solution. Okay. So I hope you have tried it. Let me take a sip of water. So let me start with the first exercise problem. So which is, write a Python program to calculate the factorial of a given number using a while loop. Okay, so let me close this screenshot. So how do we do this, right? So let's say we have a number, right, n. So we want to print out the factorial or calculate the factorial of that particular number. So what we can do is, so what we want to do, so it's always I think easier to use a pen and paper in the beginning to formulate the idea. So if we have number 5, then what we want is, we want 5 into 4 into 3 into 2 into 1, right? So one way we can think of it is, we can start from this 1, right, and we can keep incrementing that particular number, and we can have a result number which is keeping a track of the multiplication of these numbers, and when we reach the number 5, then we just stop it, right? So that is one way to do it. So let's see what we want to do. Okay, so let's say we start with a result, right? So result, this is the variable where we want to store the end result. So result is equal to 1. Then we have, let's say, number as 1. So this is what we want to start with and then keep track on. And while and n is the number that we want to find out the factorial of. So let's say 5, right? So while the number, so num is less than or equal to n, so while this number is less than this, then what we want to do is, we want to multiply the result with this particular number, right? So we start with 1, so 1 multiplied by 1, right? And then in the next loop we want to multiply 1 with 2, so we will increment this particular number by 1, right? So the number gets incremented by 1, so num will be 2, so it will be 1 multiplied by 2, the result will be 2, and in the next time number gets incremented by 1, so num will be 3, so result will be 2 multiplied by 3, right? And then it will be 6 multiplied by 4, and so on. So we do this, and we stop when the number is greater than n, right? So if we calculate this and in the end we print out the result, so let's say we print, and we print, let's say, factorial of n, right? So factorial of n is our result, right? So this should work. So factorial of 5 is 120, right? So if you calculate this, then it is 120. Okay, and this, now we can use this particular code to find out the factorial for any number that we want, right? So one thing that I would like to show you right now, later we will go into more detail, is how do we turn it into a function. Okay, so instead of like rerunning these codes, so we put it inside a function and then we just call that function to do this particular task. Okay, so you will see what do I mean by that. So I define a function, so later we will go into more detail on this. So define factorial of n, right? So what this function will do is that it will take n as input and then it will return the factorial of that particular n. Okay, so what we want to do is, so now we don't need this n is equal to 5, so n will already be called in this particular function here, and yeah, rest everything remains the same. And in the end, when we calculate the result, so we want to return the result in the end. So we will go through functions in more detail in later video, but for now, let's say I have defined this function and now I have this n is equal to 7, right? And I want to store the result. So let's say result is equal to factorial of 7, and I just want to print this. Okay, so if I run this particular program, so let me just open the terminal, and if I run this, so Python tutorial3.py, then factorial of 7 is 5040. Okay, so we can check this particular thing. So factorial of 7, it should be 7 multiplied by 6 multiplied by 5 multiplied by 4 multiplied by 3 multiplied by 2 multiplied by 1, right? So this is 5040. So you can write this piece of code as a particular function, right? And this, I will just take it back here as well. So we have a function here, and now whenever I want to check for any particular number, so I'll just I should have written n. Okay, let me just change it. So factorial of n. Okay, so if I want to take the factorial of 5, then it will give me factorial of 5, right? So if I put factorial of 6, then it gives me factorial of 6, and so on. Okay, so this was for factorial. Next, what we wanted to do is, if we have a list of numbers, then we wanted to use for loops, and we wanted to find out the sum of even numbers, right? So we want to do this. So let's take an example. So let's say we have numbers. So let's say we have numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and we want to go through this particular list and we want to calculate the sum of all the numbers that are even. Okay, so again let's do the same thing. We define a variable, result is equal to 0. So now we want to iterate through this particular list. So for num in numbers, so if number mod 2, right, so if number mod 2 is equal to 0, so if it is an even number, then what we want to do is we want to add that particular number to our result, right? So it will be this, and yeah, so this will be the sum of the even numbers, right? So if we just print the result, okay, so the sum of even numbers are 2 plus 4 6 plus 6 12 plus 8 20, 20 plus 10 30, right? So it works. So now as an exercise, what you can do is you can try to make a function out of it. So what we did here as a function, you can try to write this particular thing as a function where you give in a list and it gives you back the sum of even numbers in that particular list. Okay, now the third thing was to print the particular pattern, right? So we wanted to print this pattern here. Okay, so in this what we can do is, let's say we have a size variable, right? So size gives you like what should be the size. So size is 5, okay, the length of the stars in the last one. So size is 5. Then what you want to do is for I in range of size, right? So I will go through like 0 1 2 3 4, and then what you want to have is that you want to have one more loop. So there will be like better ways to do it. Right now I'm just showing the way to illustrate using for loops and so on. So there can be better ways to do this. So now in the second loop, what we want to do is for this j, for the first time we want to have it like just 0, right? In the second loop we want to have 0 1. In the third loop we want to have 0 1 2 and so on. So what we want to have is that range of I plus 1, right? So what happens is that for the first time when I is 0, so it will go until 0, right? So range of 1, so it will just be, j will just take 0, right? So it will just print one time. In the next time what happens is that when I is 1, so it will be range of 2, so it will go 0 1, right? So it will print 2 times. In the third time what happens is I is 0 1, so I is 2, so it will be range of 3, so it will, j will take 0 1 2, right? So it will print 3 times. So what we want to do is we want to print star, right? And the end character by default is a new line, but what we want is we just want to have a space, right? And after this particular for loop ends, then we want to go to a new line, so we just print this, right? So if we do this, then it should work, right? So size is 5, so first time I is 0, so j goes to range of I plus 1, so range of 1, so that will just be 0, so it will print one time. For the next time it will take I plus 1, so 1 plus 1 2, so j will take 0 1, so it will print 2 times and so on, right? So you can, so the more you practice, the better you will get at it. So now one last thing that I want to talk about in this video is list comprehension. So what list comprehension does is that sometimes you don't have to write these explicit for loops if you are doing some simple things, right? And this list comprehension can be very concise and it's more readable, and yeah, so it's more efficient to write it like that. So let's just go through an example to understand it better. So let's say what we want to do is we want to create a list of squares using a for loop. Okay, so if we have numbers from 1 to let's say 5, then we want to have a list which has 1 square, 2 square, 3 square, 4 square, 5 square and so on, right? So what we want to do is we have a list, let's say squares is equal to an empty list, And as I said, we will go through lists, dictionaries, and so on in more detail in later videos. But for now, let's say we have this. So for num in range 1 to 6. So what will this do is that it will go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And every time it goes through that, what we want to do is we want to append it into this list: 1 square, 2 square, 3 square, 4 square, 5 square, right? So squares dot append. So you will see what this will do. So squares dot append, and I want to append number into number, right? And if I do this, and in the end if I check what is oops, sorry. So in the end, if I want to check, so print squares. So what will happen is that we have created a list. Okay, spelling mistake. So squares, SQU. Okay. Yeah. So what this will do is that it will create a list of, so num will take 1, so 1 square, and it will append it into this empty list. So first entry will be 1 square is 1. Second entry will be 2 square 4, 3 square 9, 4 square 16, and so on. So you can also just check the list as it is getting formed here, right? So print squares. Okay, so first time it appended 1, so squares became 1, right? And then second time it will have 1 comma 2 square 4, then 149, 149, 16, 149, 16, 25, and in the end we again printed this square, right? So this is a one way to do it, that we created this particular list, right? But in list comprehension, what we can do is that we can go through this for loop. Okay, so let's say I just write it for num in range 1 to 6. Okay, so now what I want to do is that instead of going through this loop here explicitly, what we can write is we can just write number into number. Okay, so what this will do is it will do the same thing, but it will create list in a more efficient way, right? So for num in range 1 to 6, so num will take 1, right? And then 1 square, it will have 1, then num will take 2, then we'll have 2 square 4, then num will take 3, 3 square 9, 4, 4 square 16, 5, 5 square 25, right? So when we have like these simple things that we are doing here, so we can do that using this particular list comprehension, right? And this list comprehension is more concise, it takes fewer lines of code, and it is also faster in terms of execution for medium-sized lists. Okay, so let's take a few examples. So let's say we have a list of numbers and we want to get only the even numbers from those lists. Okay, so one way to do it would be using an explicit for loop. So let's say we have these numbers and we want to get the even numbers out of this list, right? So even numbers is equal to, let's say, an empty list, and what we can do is we can go through this particular list. So for num in numbers, and if the number is even, so if num divided by 2 is equal to 0, then we want to append this number into the even numbers list, right? So even numbers dot append, right? And in that we want to append this particular number, right? And when we do this, so if we print the even numbers, then we will get that, yeah, it picks out 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. But now this same thing we can do just using a list comprehension. So what we can do is, so we still want to go through this for loop, right? So you can think of it this way, that for num in numbers, right? And now what we want to do is, if this number is divisible by 2, right? So if num mod 2 is equal to 0, then in this list we want to add this number, right? So we just write num. Okay, so what this will do is it will go through this for loop. Every time it checks if the number is divisible by 2, and if it is divisible by 2, then it gives back you this particular number, right? So if you do this, then you'll get back the same list. But yeah, instead of writing these many lines of code, you can just do it in a single line of code. Okay, so it's more easier to do it. So let's keep it until this for this particular video, and in the end, as I normally do, I push everything to git. So let me just see the git status, right? Okay, so git add dot, so I have added everything, so git status, and I want to commit all of these things, so git commit m tutorial 3 for while loops added. Okay, so this I'm just pushing the code to GitHub, and you can find all of these things, right? So I've committed it, and now I want to push it. Yeah, so all of these codes will be pushed onto GitHub, so you can find these codes there, right? So this is like these are simple things, for loops, while loops, and we are just going through a number of examples, because in the beginning, if you are starting to do it, then the more you practice, the better you will get. And yeah, just keep practicing and it will get better. And in our next videos, we will go through in more details the remaining topics that we have. So just understanding what these lists are, so what is a tuple, what is dictionary, what is set, and so on. And then later we will understand more about functions, and also what a class and so on. So that will be in the later part of the videos. So thank you very much, and then see you in the next video.